Hey, well met, travelers. Season 2 of The Rings of Power is finally here, and I'm happy to report that it is still a good show, actually. It's a banger. It slaps. It is whatever you kids are saying this week to mean that something is really cool. I'm about to give my review of the first half of Season 2 of The Rings of Power. If you have not watched these first 4 episodes yet, be warned, spoilers lay ahead. Let me start with a confession. I do have criticisms of Rings of Power. I did not advertise them in my content about Season 1 because, like I said in the introductory video to my long overdue defense playlist, none of them were deal breakers for me. I only mentioned them here because I think Season 2 has addressed them very well, at least based on what we've seen in the first 4 episodes. However, the show has made one potentially devastating stumble that I'm really not happy about, at least right now. Now, I was well aware of the adaptation rights restrictions under which the production was working, and I have always been at peace with the fact that all adaptations make changes from the source material, sometimes significant ones. There are no exceptions, and there never should be. So, I went into Season 1 with a good faith attitude and an open mind, and I was happy with my experience. I felt that the showrunners and writers had made a visually stunning homage to the spirit of Tolkien's great work, complemented by a masterpiece score from Bear McCreary. And ironically, those were also the source of my main criticism of Season 1. It often felt to me in Season 1 like I was watching a pitch deck by the showrunners aimed at the Tolkien estate, trying to convince it to open up more of the Legendarium for direct adaptation. It's no secret that Amazon's agreement with the estate severely limits what elements of the Legendarium they can freely adapt. On paper, they are restricted to The Lord of the Rings and its appendices, but the estate can grant them rights to other bits on case-by-case basis. And that poses significant challenges to a show telling the story of the Second Age. So much of what I saw in Season 1 seemed like a trial run, like being a spectator alongside the real target audience, which would be the Tolkien estate, who guard all the gates and hold all the keys to the parts of the lore that Amazon and fans really want to see adapted. And this creative approach to Season 1 led to an issue that I think tended to drag the show down a bit, namely, its wonky pacing. There were times, a few too many times in my opinion, where the narrative slowed to a crawl and asked the viewer to linger in the moment without much really happening. And I think I get what the show was going for there. It was trying to evoke the feeling of reading Tolkien, who's of course notorious for devoting paragraphs and pages to descriptions of a single location or object, and thus slowing down his own narrative. That was kind of the point. So Season 1 was slow, especially in the front half. It was a good slow, occasionally a brilliant slow, never a slow that bored me or lost my attention, but still slower than it probably needed to be at times. Season 2 does not have this problem. It throws us right into a breakneck narrative that uses almost every bit of its runtime to stay focused on the stakes of the story that was set up in Season 1. A lot of consequential stuff happens right away in the first 3 episodes, and it never really lets up until episode 4. Let's start with our girl Galadriel.
A lot of talking about my girl Galadriel.
Yeah, I love Galadriel.
Season 1 ended with her caught in a massive lie of omission about the true identity of Halbrand/Sauron. Out of shame at being so easily deceived, she kept this cosmically important piece of information to herself, long enough to facilitate the creation of the 3 Elven Rings of Power, and now a cloud hangs over her reputation and her soul. Now, I was really glad to see that neither the narrative nor her fellow elves let her off the hook about this. After an extended backstory about how Sauron became Halbrand, more about that in a minute, Episode 1 of Season 2 immediately holds Galadriel accountable for her colossally poor judgment last season. For most of the first 3 episodes, her dialogue and development are constructed to humble her, to diminish her in our eyes, and to show how diminished she is in her own eyes. In addition to being admonished by Elrond and High King Gil-galad at every turn in the script, the camera itself becomes a tool of accountability for Galadriel. She is frequently shot from high angles or framed lower in the shot than other characters, a contrast from the way she was shot and framed last season, making her look small in our eyes, conveying that she feels small and repentant and uncertain of herself. Galadriel takes her medicine, accepting demotion from the king and rebuke from her best friend Elrond. In one of my favorite scenes of the show so far, Galadriel says she was tricked by Sauron and forced into a role she did not want, and Elrond ain't having that. He calls her out and reminds her that, no, honey, it was exactly what you wanted. That's why it's so dangerous and why we can't trust these rings. And speaking of the rings, I'm also glad to see that the show found a plausible, if not entirely original, explanation for how Sauron would be able to trick Celebrimbor now that exposing the Dark Lord to the Master Smith was a simple matter of just, saying, hey buddy, you know that dude Halbrand I told you not to hang with? Yeah, he's Sauron. There was some concern among fans that the show had written itself into a corner with the ending of Season 1. Not because the rings were being crafted out of order relative to the Legendarium. It was clear to me that the show, much like Peter Jackson's movies, was following the Order of the Ring poem, but precisely because Sauron's identity was no longer an easily kept secret, at least if they wanted to keep the same actor in the role. The show solves this dilemma by pulling a Romeo and Juliet. Messengers are sent, but never arrive, because Sauron's agents kill them before they can get to Celebrimbor and spill the beans. This elegant, economical solution opens up the narrative space needed to plausibly get Sauron and Celebrimbor where they need to be to tell Tolkien's classic tale of hubris and corruption. And Sauron is handled really well here. The backstory prologue of Episode 1, while not answering all of the audience questions, shows us how he came to be on that raft in that particular part of the ocean where Galadriel first met him in Season 1. It also mostly clears up any ambiguity we might have held about his motives from Season 1. Before this prologue, we could entertain the notion that Sauron was flirting with repentance last season, while also flirting with Galadriel. But we know now that all was manipulation and gaslighting. Sauron did not take that pendant off a dead man. He sent an innocent man to his death to get it. He was never dealing straight with Galadriel or anyone else he met last season. In retrospect, with information, rewatching Season 1 reveals far more layers to both the Season 1 scripts and Charlie Vickers' performance than we were first aware of. And Halbrand's transformation into Anatar, right in front of Celebrimbor's eyes, and his dubbing Celebrimbor the Lord of the Rings, is a clever use of Catholic religious imagery that evokes Tolkien's own spiritual themes in a moment that drives right to the heart of Celebrimbor's ambitions for himself. It's also wonderfully cringy, narratively justified cringe, mind you. I both winced and applauded at that moment because it provoked two completely different and yet equally valid reactions in me: the cringe and the awe. It's always a bit weird when characters in the thing say the title of the thing, but they did it in the film version of The Fellowship of the Ring too, so I don't see much room to complain about this instance more than that one. The scene does what it needs to do and provides us with some beautiful visuals while doing it. And I could say much the same for Numenor and Khazad-dûm. Very little character development we haven't already seen happens to the principal characters in these locations during the first 4 episodes. But a lot of the chess pieces set in place last season begin to move in these locations this season. And the results are visually lush, ominous, and intriguing. We are witnessing the beginning of the end of both of these great kingdoms of the Second Age, and I suspect each of their falls will have an entire season devoted to it going forward. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some really good character moments in Numenor and Khazad-dûm. Standouts to me were Valandil's thus far only appearance in the season, when he confronts Kemen and Eärien over their disloyalty to Queen Regent Miriel. And all of the conversations between Durin III, Durin IV, and Disa deliver terrific character work, though not much in terms of actually moving the larger plot forward. These scenes all feel like foreshadowing of much more consequential events to happen in the back half of the season. And since I'm now being mildly critical of what I've seen so far, let me lay it on a little thicker, with a major gripe I have with the Rings of Power this season. Prepare yourselves, Trollkeens. This is the part the algorithm loves. The show killed Bronwin off screen for no good narrative reason that I can see. It's true that Nazanin Baniati left the show after season 1, but the departure of an actor from a project does not require their character to be killed off. Rings of Power obviously understands this because they quickly recast the character of Adar, and the new actor is great in the role. So why kill off Bronwyn, other than to motivate Arondir and Theo to avenge her or honor her memory? I thought we were all past this trope of killing off a male hero's female love interest just to motivate him into action in the broader narrative. I mean, Deadpool undid all of this for us in his second movie. Although it wasn't an end credits scene, so maybe Rings of Power missed it. Anyway, the trope of fridging a woman to serve a man's narrative has been rightly criticized as both lazy and sexist writing pretty much since it happened in the pages of Green Lantern in the frickin' 90s. Now, I'm salty about this because the Arondir-Bronwyn romance was one of my favorite elements in Season 1. It was rich with romantic narrative potential, including opportunities for thematic parallels with the tale of Beren and Luthien, something the new romance storyline with Isildur and Estrid, and it's looking like with Elendil and Miriel too, do not offer. So why did the showrunners decide that Bronwyn had to die? I'm at a loss. Now, I'm willing to let it slide for now because I love the show overall, and they've demonstrated to me that they are capable of telling good stories and are honoring Tolkien's larger themes in a way that no other Lord of the Rings adaptation ever has. So this bit could just end up being a Season 2 analog for my Season 1 concern about the pacing, which is to say, a criticism I have of the show without it becoming a deal breaker. But if Arondir and Theo don't develop motivations on their now separate paths other than avenging Bronwyn's death or honoring her memory, Rings of Power will have sincerely disappointed me, something it has not yet done. They've got a few seasons to recover, of course, but right now, I'm still pretty bummed about the whole thing. Poor Bronwyn. Poor Arondir. Poor Theo. Now, perhaps the most anticipated development in Season 2 is the appearance of Tom Bombadil, a Tolkien character who has never been adapted to the screen before. Tom is a tricky and controversial character, the purpose of whose presence in Tolkien's novels has never been entirely clear. So it's been interesting trying to figure out how he will be used in the development of the Strangers storyline. I know it's basically the fan consensus by now that the Stranger is Gandalf, and Rings of Power is dropping a lot of hints that that's how things will end up. But I'm still not convinced, at least not entirely. I'm still hoping for the Blue Wizards idea, and thinking that the show is going to make a composite character out of the Stranger, half Blue Wizard and half Gandalf. Like, maybe he won't be actual Gandalf, but we'll have one of the Blue Wizard's names, and will get called Gandalf by the Harfoots as a term of endearment, and then that term of endearment will be passed down to actual Gandalf in the future. But on the other hand, this is a show about the Rings of Power, and Gandalf does end up with one of the Elven Rings, and it's given to him by Círdan, so maybe he is Gandalf after all. Actual Gandalf, that is. Either way, it's pretty clear that Tom Bombadil is in this story to play Yoda to the Stranger's Luke Skywalker, and that Tom will be the one to spark the revelation of the Stranger's actual name. We'll then get both versions of the Blue Wizard story, with Ciarán Hinds' Dark Wizard helping Sauron's cause and the Stranger resisting it, each of them thus embodying one of the two versions of the story that Tolkien left us. Now, I'll admit, I was at first a bit nonplussed by Rory Kinnear's performance as Tom Bombadil. His understated take on the character is a far cry from Tom's many interpretations in Lord of the Rings audiobooks over the years, which have tended towards the bombastic and sometimes even the outright silly. Kinnear's subdued, disarming spin on old Tom certainly subverted my expectations, as did the script assigning him a more active role in the narrative than he has in Tolkien's books. I wasn't sure how to feel about that until I remembered that the book version of Tom is shown to us from the point of view of hobbits, who are basically defenseless children at that point in the story. But in Rings of Power, we are meeting Tom from the stranger's perspective, and the stranger and Tom are much closer to each other in power and status, even if the stranger doesn't know it yet. As an Istar, the stranger would draw a different dynamic out of Tom than would a group of tiny defenseless hobbits. To my mind, it's much more of a peer-to-peer relationship than anything Tom could have with someone like Nori or Frodo. In the books, Gandalf, one of the Istar, reminisced fondly on his past visits with Tom, where they sat talking together for many long hours. So perhaps we are seeing the beginning of that friendship here. So in conclusion, overall, Season 2 of The Rings of Power is thus far a step up from an already terrific Season 1. Despite its stumble in the handling of Bronwin, the show still hews more closely to Tolkien's spiritual and environmental themes than any other adaptation ever has. And with its increasingly darkening tone, its ability to now incorporate more hints at the wider legendarium, and the looming siege of Eregion, it looks like Season 2 will shape up as truly compelling prestige television. At least for me. I'm really excited to see what the second half of Season 2 of Rings of Power brings. But let me know what you think in the comments. Be sure to either like or dislike this video to help boost it in the algorithm. And until next time, remember that what's best in life is to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and engage in discourse with the women. Namarie.